Whoa, hold up. You said how Scotland created the UK, the USA, the Bible, and Canada, but all you've given me is an overview of some dead king. Well, I do apologise, but we'll get there eventually. But this week, we got the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones, and even a little bit of Burzum thrown in there, by which I mean murder. This story definitely depicts deceptively dark tales of decapitation. So, condensed history time. James II was born in 1432. Surprise, surprise, James I and Jean Beaufort. You could say that James II had a pretty rough start in life, as by age 7 his father had been murdered. Familiar. But as I was saying, he was born in Holyrood Abbey, still standing by the way, and his first birthday his older twin brother Alexander would be dead. Again, so far I feel like I'm just rereading the script of James I. Still not sure how babies died back then. Cold or some shit. I don't know. Medicine wasn't great. Your midwife was also probably your local fishmonger. But anyway, this left James II to become heir to the throne. As previously discussed, James I was assassinated in 1437, and James II immediately succeeded him as king. In 1449, when the king was 19, he married Mary of Guelders, who was 15 at the time, the absolute animal, like he was a 1440s version of Paul Walker or something. But I digress. During his reign, relations with Flanders improved, and he was generally considered to be an all-round pretty good guy, at least until 1452, but we'll get there. He had a reputation for being good with the commoners, like with most Stewarts, got drunk with them in times of peace and in times of war, but his 19-year-old male likes to get pissed, really news to anyone. Oh, and he ordered the construction of Glasgow University in 1451, which isn't usually the sort of thing paedophiles get up to. They usually just go and join a church. Alright, so what's interesting? The Red Wedding. Okay, but the Black Dinner. But if you've ever watched Game of Thrones, or f*** it, even if you haven't, you probably still know what Facebook is, so therefore, probably being exposed to every single Game of Thrones storyline anyway, you might know what's coming. Kinda. So back in 1440, the king is 10 and the empire is about to be ran by Earls again. Archibald Douglas, the king's first cousin, so you know it's going to end in murder and families involved, also known as the 5th Earl of Douglas, headed the government as Lieutenant General of the realm. He dies and there's a bit of a power struggle. No one's really got enough authority to rule the realm, so it's sort of split between William Crichton, the First Lord of Crichton, also the Lord Chancellor of Scotland, and who is sometimes in cooperation with the Earl of Avondale, and Alexander Livingston of Callander. They eventually gained possession of the king as warden of the stronghold of Stirling Castle, a castle with its own unique history, but we'll get to that in James IV. Yep, that's 2 episodes in a row where I've plugged James IV. Anyway, the Earls placed James II's mother, Jean Beaufort, and her new husband, Her new what? In the 1440s. That's pretty progressive for the time. I mean, it's 2017, you still can't get a divorce in the Philippines. But I digress. Jean Beaufort and her new husband, Sir John Stewart, well, that's after getting her name changed again, were placed under house arrest until they agreed to give up custody of James II. To add insult to injury, they were also forced to give up his maintenance dowry and forced to sign a confession stating that Livingston had only acted with zeal for the king's security. Now that Livingston had control of the king, he uses this to create the Black Dinner. Presumably, Lord Chancellor Crichton, but in the king's name, sent an invitation to the 16-year-old and now 6th Earl of Douglas and his 11-year-old brother to visit the king at Edinburgh Castle in November 1440. They were entertained to a royal feast, got to hear some banging tunes, before hastily being beheaded in the front yard. You know, casual like, nothing overly dramatic. As you might expect, this somewhat crippled the Douglases, at least for the time being. Back to 1449 and the king reaches adulthood, but he is still sort of under the influence of his earls. The Earls of Douglas, who always just seem to keep turning back up no matter how many of them get murdered, and Lord Crichton threw Alexander Livingston of Callander under the bus, so to speak, and advised James II to take retaliation against Livingston for the arrest of his mother, which in effect also removed her political credibility. It doesn't really state what happened, but what is known is that Livingston pretty much disappeared from the picture and would die in 1451. But it's in 1452 where the king's reign gets a bit of a tarnishing, as unlike 1440 where the king was 10 and therefore presumably not all too aware of the larger picture, in 1452 James II goes all Varg Vikernes on a motherfucker, by which I mean he stabbed a guy 26 times and threw him out of a castle window. But not just any guy, William Douglas, the 8th Earl of Douglas. Yep. The Douglases and the Stewarts were not friends, so it's safe to say that this invitation to the council with the king was met with suspicion, but to show good faith the king had also sent a seal of safe conduct, his word of safe passage. Apparently All Fury Face, legit nickname by the way, wasn't too happy that the Douglases had formed a league of power with Alexander the Tiger Lindsay, the Earl of Crawford, and John of Islay, the Earl of Ross, Lord of the Isles, and demanded that it cease. But failing to come to an agreement, William Douglas's body laid a bloody mess at the bottom of a castle window. But it would seem that James wasn't the only one hungry for some blood that day, as apparently several other men got involved, and eventually one cut his brain in half with a poleaxe. Surely a poleaxe to the head alone was sufficient enough, but who am I to judge? It was clearly a party. Didn't end well though, and sort of escalated into a minor civil war between the king and the Black Douglases from 1452 to 1455. There was some ebb and flow to this civil war, a few skirmishes, and the king's reign coming into jeopardy and apparently being close to overthrown, but finally comes to an end at the Battle of Arkinholm in 1455. So a battle of a few hundred people is about to take place. The battle, even though it's being fought in the name of the king, is also a direct fight between the Douglases. Between the Black Douglases, the Earls of Douglas, and the Red Douglases, the Earls of Angus, led by George Douglas, a third cousin to the 9th and current Earl of Douglas, James Douglas. As fate would have it, it was a better battle for the Red Douglases than it was for the Black. The battle involved 3 of the 5 Black Douglas brothers, well 4 I guess, seeing as William was thrown out of a window and is now currently in possession of an actual uni-hemispherical brain. 2 of the Black Douglases, Archibald Douglas, Earl of Murray, was killed in battle and his head later presented to the king. Goody goody, oh how I like presents. And Hugh Douglas, Earl of Ormond, was captured and later executed, but lucky boy John Douglas, Lord of Balvenie, managed to escape to England to reunite with his brother James Douglas, who was already in England looking to drum up support against the Scottish king. Didn't work out well for him though, and the remaining brothers didn't return to Scotland until 1460. It was pretty much the end of the Douglas clan, their castles and their lands taken by the crown. So with James I having removed the Albany Stuarts and James II effectively removing the Douglases, it seemed like a stable, centralised royal power in Scotland was finally becoming a thing. And it does, until the Douglases pop back up again, but only this time to piss off James III. James II only continued downhill from here though, with plans to take over the islands of Orkney, Shetland and the Isle of Man, none of which coming to fruition, and in 1458 comes the Act of Parliament, basically telling James II to chill the f*** out with the mad shit. Luckily for the unfortunate few who had probably been lining up for a good poleaxing before flying your body out of a window, that in 1460 James II would die. But like a good medieval king, he didn't die in his sleep, he went out with a bang, quite literally. James II is currently laying siege to Roxburgh Castle, one of the last Scottish castles being held by the English after the Wars of Independence. There's no other way to say this than just James II really loved his cannons. He had imported them from Flanders and used them with success against the Black Douglases. It is said that James II spent more time firing his cannons than actually directing combat. How true that is, I don't know. However, given that one of these cannons, lovingly named the Lion, broke during firing and a miscellaneous cannon part ripped through his thigh bone, causing him to fall and die rather hastily, I'd say that it was some indication that he wouldn't let no fire his mother cannon. The Scots carried on with the siege because why let a small thing like your king dying stop you from taking part in glorious bloodshed and reclaiming a castle? George Douglas, the Red Douglas, also known as the 4th Earl of Angus, however you prefer to remember him, took a hold of the castle a few days later, and James II's wife, Marie of Guelders, ordered the destruction of Roxburgh Castle. Because why blame the cannon when you can blame the castle? In the wake of James II's death, and as the Regency Council of James III, led by his mother, was just getting underway, James and John Douglas would return from England, trying to stir up some commotion to lead a new rebellion against the crown. Still smitten to England, they ratified the Treaty of Ardtornish, Westminster, along with John Isla, Lord of the Isles, which in short was an agreement that if England conquered Scotland, it would be split into 3. The Regency Council of James III weren't all too thrilled about this and placed a bounty on their heads. In 1463, John Douglas would again be in the borders trying to drum up support for a rebellion, where he is captured by the Scots of Liddesdale, where he would be taken to Edinburgh, held prisoner for 12 days, before finally being beheaded. James Douglas would go on to annoy James III even further, but we'll get to that next time. And that's where we'll end it for today, because last video took forever to finish, and I really don't have a closer for this episode, so I'm just going to say don't be the guy that gets his legs blown off by a cannon. Didn't work out well for James II, and it probably won't work out well for you.